What's going on, everybody? It's your boy D Guy Sense back on the D Guy Sense Show with episode 8. And the topic of today's episode is it is easier to detect the truth than a lie. So, first off, let me go ahead and explain what I mean by this. So, as everyone knows, there is a common test called the lie detector test, right? Which typically is used to determine if someone is being untruthful. And the way it's usually done is you have to hook up all these different um, not a whole bunch of different devices, but a device, and it measures different activities within the human vessel. So, what if you can't access that? What about before the lie detector test was a thing? Which is easier to detect, the truth or a lie? And the simple answer is the truth. And before I get into that, we have to understand that deception and manipulation have been a thing of the past, a thing of the present, and will be a thing of the future. All because most people lack discernment, the ability to accurately assess people's intentions, motives, and quite frankly, themselves. Um, so, with that being said, y'all, let's go ahead and jump into it. So, it is easier to detect the truth than a lie. Guys, one thing we must understand about the truth is it's black or white, right? People will try to tell partial truths, right? Which most people would say, well, they're lying, and you would have to say, not necessarily, right? The thing about partial truths is they leave a clue or a hint to where the rest of the puzzle lies. You know what I mean? Um, so I had to go ahead and say that. But when it comes to the truth is usually based in fact or very, very strong evidence or a universally understood principle. Um, Hence, the truth. You know what I mean? And the reason the truth is much easier to detect because the truth requires honesty, um, upforwardness, bluntness. It requires people to do the hard thing in human nature, which is to deny the easy route. Because it's easy to lie and cater to people's feelings, their emotions, and basically just avoid the consequence of, and when I say consequence, I just mean the repercussion of telling the truth despite, or not despite, in spite of what would transpire after the fact. And, it's very important to understand that the truth is hard to do, right? Because it just requires a lot of self awareness and self discipline to, in the face of whether it be danger or something you don't want to happen, you have to be brave and courageous, right? That's why I say most people are cowards, right? Because they lack the aptitude to tell the truth because they are too scared to be up forward and honest, right? That's why I say most people have rarely met an honest person because to be honest is to be truthful, right? Sounds easy, sounds simple, you know, they're closely related, right? But the question you have to ask yourself at the end of the day is, well, why is it so hard? And it's simply because most people don't have the courage to um, to deal with the actions that they'll receive in return for being honest, right? People are usually closed off. People will typically tend to um, detest you, right? But that's just because people lack accountability. You get what I'm saying? So, in order to even be honest, you have to have the courage to be disliked because with honesty comes harsh realities, right? And as I always say, why are people so um, keen on ducking the truth? Is because everyone has a positive self opinion of themselves, right? Meaning, if you ask most people, they'll tell you that they're a good person. They'll tell you that they have integrity. They'll tell you that they don't lie, that they're always truthful, and forthcoming. They'll admit to you all these things despite it being a lie, right? And the reason I say the truth is easier to detect is because their words and their actions will match up, right? The thing about the reason that lying works so well is because they're very good at showing you bits and pieces of it, right? And in order to really detect the truth, you have to be open to what's being displayed in front of you. Um, right? So, although it is easier to detect, most people will never be able to accomplish this is because they're in denial, right? They're delusional about it, which means that their perception of what's happening is different from how things are actually happening, reality, right? Like if you believe that you're the best at something, right, but the results show otherwise, you would be considered delusional. Why? Because your perception of life is different from reality. So when it comes to detecting the truth, you'll notice, right? Truth tellers usually all have the same tendencies, right? Just the same way that sociopaths and narcissists and psychopaths do, right? There's usually underlying attributes that they have, right? Like most people that tell the truth generally don't care what the general public thinks about their perception of them. You know what I mean? Most truth tellers have come to terms with the fact that um, people aren't going to like the truth and they're okay with telling the truth uh, despite that fact. You get what I'm saying? So, yes, the truth is easier to detect, right? And the reason a lie is actually harder to detect is because they can control how much of it truly comes out, right? Remember how earlier I said the truth leaves clues, right? With lies, you ever notice that people tell lies? You ever heard the old story when they say, if you tell a lie, you'll have to make up a lie, you'll have to make up the lie to cover another lie, and a bigger lie to cover up that lie, right? No one has ever truly addressed this simple flaw in that whole theory. How are people able to do it so well for so long? Right? You've never heard someone say, well, you have to tell the truth to cover up the truth and to tell another truth. That's not how that works, right? Because the truth is straightforward. It's point A to point B, right? You don't go all these different directions because once you start telling a lie, you eventually have to come back to A in order to get to B. You can't go from A to Z and then T because now you're out of order, right? You got to come all the way back to the beginning. And so the reason it's easier for people to lie than tell the truth is because you can create the narrative or the story in your own mind, right? The truth is written, but a lie is infinite, right? That's why it's so hard to deal with liars, and that's why they cannot be trusted is because you never know where the story truly ends or begins because they're creating the false narrative as they go along, right? Hence the old quote that I just mentioned. You tell a lie, then you have to tell another one and another one, right? So people will say, well, eventually you'll get caught up. And that's not necessarily true as well. Because if that was the case, people wouldn't get away with telling a lie for months, years, decades on end, right? It wouldn't even be a thing if people had such good lie detector tests in their head, right? Good lie detectors in their mind, right? People would get caught lying. You know what I mean? Most people actually get caught up in lies due to some physical evidence left behind, opposed to their speech and their actions, right? That's why I say when you're dealing with people, you should seek out the truth more so than the lie, because a lie, you'll never be able to tell if they're good at covering their physical tracks because of how much they're able to control the narrative, right? But the thing about the truth is, you can't fake having integrity. You know what I mean? You just can't. You can't fake being courageous, right? You can't fake bravery, right? So say for instance someone's on the cliff, right? And I'm trying to think of a way to explain it. Think about a movie scene where someone is they're hanging off a cliff, right? And someone's watching, right? uh it's much easier to look at them and pick them up and that be the truth, opposed to if you turn your back and the person got up and then they say, yep, I raised them up, right? And the other person is just standing there looking, right? once you didn't see what happened, you're basically up to the narrator to basically fill you in on what took place, right? So pretty much what I'm saying is your eyes have to be fully locked in on the situation to pick out the truth, right? And the thing about the truth is there'll be evidence always, right? Like, for example, in the first scenario that I just named, if you watch them pull them up, you physically saw it, right? But there will be marks from the guy that laid down and tried to pick him up off the cliff. You will see some form of evidence left behind, right? But say in the second scenario where you turned around and the guy's just up there, um, the guy that was hanging out the cliff raises himself up, right? And then the guy that you turned around, the one that was standing up, he says, "Yeah, I helped him up. I helped him get up here." And then, right, you don't investigate any deeper into the truth of the matter, right? See, the only way a lie can continue is if you never examine the truth, right? You never go investigate the evidence of what was left behind, right? You basically took the person at their words and their words only. You never walk to close to the edge, not necessarily to the edge, but you walk near the edge to see if those half truths left the clues there. You see what I'm saying? Because the truth is going to leave evidence behind, but lies, they're infinite. There will always be another lie to be told. That's why it's very, very dangerous to deal with a liar because you never know where the story ends or begins. And one thing that is worth pointing out is when it comes to the truth, it's we all understand this concept, right? Most people don't accept it. So if we all agree that most people don't accept the truth, we should all also agree that most people will not tell the truth, right? Because people usually do for example, right, when you're a child and you're raised up a certain way, you typically display um, environmental things that you picked up throughout your life, right? So that's why people can be habitual liars and they got it from their parents, right? So if we all understand that most people are uh, innately liars and not truth tellers, we should all be looking for truth, right? Because it's going to be the least common thing, right? It's much harder to spot the common or the uncommon thing. Or wait, hold on, I think I'm mixing that up. It's harder to spot the common thing or the uncommon thing than the common thing. Or it's easier to spot the uncommon thing than the common thing. There we go. I don't know. I was messing that up that bad. Yeah. So the truth is going to be more uncommon, right? So it's going to be um, easier to spot versus the lies that everyone tells. They all blend in with other false narratives that have been created, right? For example, when it comes to the truth, it's much harder to tell a half truth than a half lie. And let that sink in because on the surface it might sound similar or even the same, right? But the truth is this: the truth only ever has one story. You see what I'm saying? That's why when you tell a half truth, it'll leave a clue behind as to what truly transpired. But if you tell a half lie, right, with no truth, that's why you're even able to tell another lie to cover up that one because you have to keep the perception of the truth there for them to believe it, right? That's how people are able to get lied to for so long. They're putting up a facade of truth for so long that eventually either they get so good at it and you're so entrenched in it that you can't see that you're even caught in the web in the first place, right? So now you're stuck in it for years or even decades, or people die or you all just fall out, right? That's typically what happens. Or they get tired of it and they just come forth with the truth. And that's why it's always such a shock to people whenever they've been lied to for so long, and all of a sudden they're like, how could I have not seen this beforehand, right? Why wasn't I able to foresee this? And it's because you never investigated whether it was a half truth or a half lie, or a truth or a lie. But nonetheless, it all always comes down to an investigation on your behalf. Um, but with that being said, y'all, this was episode 8 of the D Got Sent Show. It is easier to detect the truth than a lie. Hopefully, y'all enjoyed yourselves. I had a blast, getting on here, chopping it up for a little bit. But with that being said, peace. I'm out.